Meanwhile, on one of the news broadcasts on TV, they broadcast the conditions that occurred in a penthouse in the middle of Manhattan, New York. In the news said that everything started from a strangeness that appeared above the penthouse to a large explosion that made the penthouse collapsed and flattened to the ground. It was also known that the original owner of the penthouse, which turned out to be Seo Joo-Heon, was not yet known. But shortly after that, the news reporter said that Seo Joo-Heon had come out of the rubble of the penthouse unharmed. Meanwhile, at the scene, there were still faint sounds of Seo-Ah, who continued to shout the name Seo Joo-Heon. After they saw Seo Joo-Heon, who came out of the rubble, they began to approach Seo Joo-Heon and asked about his condition. But it seemed that Seo Joo-Heon was fine, as he told his friends to collect the relics he had obtained earlier. Ju-heon and Seo-Ah were surprised to see the mountain of relics that were tied together using relic ropes. Ju-heon cried at the fact that he was the one who had to fix all the relics, while Seo-Ah looked at Seo Joo-Heon with a look of admiration for defeating Jin Chae-won. Seo Joo-Heon walked up to them looking shabby and dirty, but Seo Joo-Heon looked fine, and he told Seo-Ah to find a new place for them to live. And Ju-heon, he was given the task of carrying the relic and taking care of the reporters who were there. And with that, Seo Joo-Heon also asked for their permission to faint for 1 week. Everyone there was confused, but they were all surprised when they saw Seo Joo-Heon, who limped back and lay there unconscious. Everyone became worried seeing Seo Joo-Heon, who fainted. Meanwhile, in another place was seen Jin Chae-won, who was still upset because he was defeated by Seo Joo-Heon, but the relic did not want to admit that they lost and saw it as one of the cheats committed by Seo Joo-Heon to them. But Jin Chae-won still considered it a defeat for falling into Seo Joo-Heon's cunning plan. Jin Chae-won also asked the Spider Commander not to interfere in the future and take over his body just like that. But the relic, who did not want to lose, made another excuse to Jin Chae-won, to which he only responded lazily. Jin Chae-won had arrived at a large safe door, and as soon as he opened the door, a dark purple aura emanated from inside. It seemed that Jin Chae-won had another plan to defeat Seo Joo-Heon. Slowly, he approached a tightly locked box with several purple chains surrounding it. And when Jin Chae-won tried to open it, a bright purple light burst from inside the box. Jin Chae-won was seen laughing and telling the mysterious relic in the box to find its own user. Instantly, the mysterious relic came out and began to fly freely to the outside world, looking for someone to use as its user. A few days later, it was seen Ju-heon, who was repairing Nero's relic with his abilities, but it seems that Nero screamed in pain when Ju-heon tried to fix it. Ju-heon also seemed annoyed because he had to repair the relic along with overtime, but Nero still rebelled and hit Ju-heon on the head using his relic body. After that, it was seen Irene, who was checking the condition of Ju-heon, who was not okay. Irene also intended to teach a lesson to the new relic that rebelled while being repaired, but Ju-heon refused to do so. Irene also asked Ju-heon to take a little rest to calm his mind. Ju-heon took Irene's suggestion to rest, and as he walked towards the living room, he saw Seo-Ah, who was watching a news that showed that there were some people who were chosen by some relics and made them a relic user without them having to conquer the tomb to get the relic. And because of this, there was some chaos that hit fellow relic users. Seo-Ah explained to Ju-heon if there were some people who suddenly became a relic user with God tier because they were chosen by the relic itself. Seo-Ah allowed that this could happen because of the relic's own will, but she did not expect that there would be so many relics popping up and choosing their own users. Everything sounded suspicious. Even Ju-heon was a little jealous of those who were chosen. Ju-heon even saw on the TV broadcast that there were several people who became relic users with God tier in one night. Meanwhile, there were some people who were jealous of those who were chosen. Everything became chaotic because there were some people who couldn't accept the incident. But now, someone who knew very well about relics was sleeping for a long time after the incident that happened in the penthouse. Meanwhile, Irene was seen waiting happily and boredomlessly beside Seo Joo-Heon, who was still sleeping peacefully on her bed. Irene looked happy as she looked at Seo Joo-Heon's sleeping face. But her time with Seo Joo-Heon was interrupted when she heard the sound of a door opening and revealing Seo-Ah and Ju-heon from there. Irene calmed down Ju-heon, who was worried because Seo Joo-Heon had been asleep for several days. As Seo Joo-Heon looked very comfortable in her sleep, Seo Joo-Heon seemed to be very tired after she used a lot of relics to fight Jin Chae-won. Seo Joo-Heon was lucky because she did not get serious injuries from the results of her battle and only slept for a few days. Irene was very happy when she saw the sleeping face of Seo Joo-Heon, which she thought was very cute. In contrast to Ju-heon, who was a little horrified at the expression on Irene's face, Seo-Ah seemed jealous to see Irene, who was very flowery when she was with Seo Joo-Heon. Seo-Ah also asked Irene to leave Seo Joo-Heon so that they would not bother her, but before Irene could answer, they all heard a call that turned out to be from George. Irene moved to answer the call. After Irene picked up the phone from her brother, George immediately asked about the current state of Seo Joo-Heon. Irene answered honestly if Seo Joo-Heon was now sleeping due to fatigue. Irene also asked George's needs so that he could convey it to Ju-heon and Seo-Ah, who were nearby. George began to tell his true purpose and he wanted them to check the rank given by Pandora, but George had to say that all the king's seats had been used up by the new divine relic users. Seo-Ah and Ju-heon were surprised when they heard that. Seo-Ah asked to make sure if what he heard was the truth, and it seemed that George was telling the truth. Seo-Ah didn't want to believe it, neither did Ju-heon, because becoming a king is not an easy matter. Even with all the hard work they both did, they didn't get the king title. Ju-heon, who was upset, also confirmed that there was no cheating done by Pandora. But George said that this time, the cause might be the appearance of relic users with a new god tier. Seo-Ah also thought that the appearance of the relic was the behavior of someone who deliberately did it to meet the king candidate. But there was nothing George could do because Pandora had decided this, and it seemed that Seo Joo-Heon could not help with this problem either. Irene also regretted that because now Seo Joo-Heon's health was the most important thing to think about. And with that they could only pray that Seo Joo-Heon quickly recovered and returned to normal. In a building scene, Seo Joo-Heon, who was lying slowly, opened his eyes, and as soon as he opened his eyes, he immediately got a joyful hug from Irene, who was waiting for him on the side. Irene also asked about the state of Seo Joo-Heon, who had just woken up because of the commotion. Seo-Ah and Ju-heon entered the room, and they were very happy when they found out that Seo Joo-Heon had woken up. Seo Joo-Heon woke up right after a week of lying in his bed as expected by him. When Seo Joo-Heon asked what happened while he was sleeping, the two people looked surprised and hesitated to answer him. Seo Joo-Heon, who had just woken up, looked at them tiredly because something must have happened. Seo Joo-Heon asked them to tell the information, but before that, Seo Joo-Heon would clean himself and eat first, after finishing the shower, and now he was still eating. Seo Joo-Heon asked about the relic with the god tier that appeared. Ju-heon also explained that there were some relics with tier gods that appeared and chose their own owners. Seo Joo-Heon found it strange that the relics chose their own users instead of making tombs to be conquered later. Seo-Ah also agreed with Seo Joo-Heon that it was indeed strange. Although sometimes some relics choose their own users, but for relics with god tier they have personalities that are difficult to manage, and strangely now there are some relics with god tier that choose their own users. Seo Joo-Heon tried to think of someone behind this incident. His assumption led to Jin Chae-won and Pandora. Seeing Seo Joo-Heon, who thought Ju-heon also delivered the next news, where Pandora had chosen and decided on all the king candidates. From the information obtained from George, he said that the selected users became very strong. Seo Joo-Heon felt that it was bad news because taking a seat from someone would be harder to do than occupying an empty seat. But Seo Joo-Heon asked them not to worry because the king could change later. Ju-heon seemed hesitant to deliver the next news, but Seo did not know if there was any other information that he missed. Ju-heon also showed an article from his cell phone. There were several false rumors about Seo Joo-Heon which were all lies made up. Seo Joo-Heon looked at it with annoyance, and the news that managed to anger Seo Joo-Heon was a rumor where Seo Joo-Heon was said to have a child. Seo Joo-Heon was angry and wanted to slam the phone when she heard the absurd news. Ju-heon explained that the rumor said Seo Joo-Heon had a 9-year-old child and her mother had died, although Ju-heon knew that it was fake news. But someone had burned with jealousy, and when she looked at Seo, it seemed that the woman was blindly jealous. Not only Seo, Irene from the other direction also burned with jealousy when she found out Seo Joo-Heon had a child. They both asked for an explanation from Seo Joo-Heon. Seo Joo-Heon tried to explain if it was just a misunderstanding. Seo Joo-Heon confirmed that the news was fake because 9 years ago, he was still a child. Seo Joo-Heon tried to find a photo of the child, and after finding the photo he showed it to Irene. There was a photo of a small blonde child from France. Seo Joo-Heon persuaded Irene that they had nothing to do with each other or even a slight resemblance. Seo and Irene calmed down when they saw the child. Seo Joo-Heon assumed that this was the work of a relic, just like the gobble relic used by Wade that could create rumors about a person. But Seo Joo-Heon had stolen it from Wade before. Ju-heon didn't understand why if Seo Joo-Heon had the relic would attack itself as well, but Seo Joo-Heon rejected that idea because he had destroyed the relic before. Seo Joo-Heon had destroyed relics that she didn't like or relics that had a bad risk of being used. The relic was a relic of the Nazi army, and there were a lot of relics about them. That's why this situation was even more absurd. Seo Joo-Heon was thinking about the possibility of a relic that could have the same ability as the gobble relic, but she herself wasn't sure about the assumption. But he himself was not sure of his own assumptions, and he intended to seek more information about the current situation. After Seo Joo-Heon continued eating with the news that took away his appetite, but there was some news that he heard afterwards, and it was good news. Ju-heon had finished repairing the relics he had, and all the relics that are commonly used are in good condition. The relics that were stolen from some of the monsters he fought before are still not repaired and are only stored safely. Seo Joo-Heon also began to analyze the usefulness of the relics, and he will look for relics that are very useful and repair them. After Seo Joo-Heon analyzed some of the relics, there are some relics that are useful and he wants to use, such as Pygmalion sculpting tools and Spark from Hephaestus Forge. Pygmalion is a sculptor who lived in Greek mythology, where it is said that Pygmalion sculpted a statue of a very beautiful woman and fell in love with his own statue, while Hephaestus is a Greek god weapons maker who is famous for his expertise and prowess in making weapons. Since Spark was not a Hephaestus relic, so it was not a god-tier relic, and since Pygmalion was also not a god, then his relics were only high-tier relics, but Ju-heon should still be able to use them. And after taking a few days to analyze the relic, Seo Joo-Heon had gathered information to decide their destination after this. After gathering information, Seo Joo-Heon decided to go to a tomb that was still often talked about by people. But the reason they prioritized the tomb was because of a photo that showed Ju-heon talking to the two people there. But what Seo Joo-Heon meant was the little boy in the photo who claimed that he was the son of Seo Joo-Heon, and it seems that the child is a relic user. age does not determine a relic user, like the little girl who had the Medusa relic before. Seo Joo-Heon was eager to meet the child who had dared to deceive everyone by spreading such rumors, and Seo Joo-Heon intended to take away the relic owned by the child. Meanwhile, in an area in Kazakhstan, precisely in a building that looks like an old school building, Yoon Si-woo is seen, who is a little happy because they can finally conquer this tomb without interference from Seo Joo-Heon. Yoon Si-woo is annoyed because in front of him now there are several people blocking his way. Seen Ju-heon, who was still standing looking at Yoon Si-woo. Yoon Si-woo also asked about his situation to his subordinates who were there. The subordinates had tried to persuade Ju-heon, but the man seemed unwilling to listen to them. Yoon Si-woo was getting annoyed and told them to forcibly remove Ju-heon. It seemed that the other subordinates who were there disagreed because Ju-heon was very strong and he had just been crowned as a king, and someone named Guinness said that they had to get rid of Ju-heon. It seemed that Guinness was impatient because the previous spear had been taken by someone, and a little boy came towards them. The little boy named Lewis Martin said that they had to hurry while Seo Joo-Heon had not acted. The subordinates thought so they had to move quickly, and they wanted to try to negotiate with Ju-heon. Ju-heon, who heard his name being called, turned his head, and he saw Yoon Si-woo and his people who came to him. Ju-heon also prevented them from entering because this tomb was very dangerous, and if they allowed them to enter, Ju-heon would let them in as long as they entered with only one person. Because Ju-heon could not let Yoon Si-woo use his subordinates to lure his trap alone, Yoon Si-woo was angry that Ju-heon was still arguing with him. Lewis even thought that this would never go well. They whispered to carry out their plan. Yoon Si-woo tried to distract from Ju-heon by constantly engaging him in conversation, but it seems that his plan did not work well when they saw Seo Joo-Heon calling them and coming to him. All of them who were there were surprised when they saw Seo Joo-Heon, who suddenly appeared. Even Ju-heon thought that Seo Joo-Heon was still lying on his bed at this time. Seo Joo-Heon also praised Ju-heon for making the people from the TBM stop. Ju-heon did not accept when Seo Joo-Heon called him his subordinate and said that he did not do all this for Seo Joo-Heon. People from TBM were surprised when they heard Ju-heon had become a subordinate of Seo Joo-Heon after rejecting the offer from CEO Kwon. They also began to blame Ju-heon, who did everything just for Seo Joo-Heon, but Ju-heon rejected that statement. Ju-heon looked angry now, and he asked Seo Joo-Heon to explain everything to them. An angry Ju-heon threatened Seo Joo-Heon if he would not hesitate to attack him after Seo Joo-Heon broke his promise last time. Seo Joo-Heon challenged Ju-heon and told him to come forward to attack him. Seo Joo-Heon further provoked the TBM people, and that's why Ju-heon was blamed for being a hypocrite. The angry Ju-heon began to use his power on Seo Joo-Heon, and after a lightning bolt was successfully launched by Ju-heon, Seo Joo-Heon immediately dodged the attack and slid back. Seo Joo-Heon then showed the contract he had made together with Ju-heon. Ju-heon did not want to recognize such an unfairly written contract. Ju-heon, who still continued to chase Seo Joo-Heon with his lightning attack, made everyone there dumbfounded. Yoon Si-woo, who saw that Seo Joo-Heon and Ju-heon were fighting each other, did not know what was happening, but an idea came to their heads to help Ju-heon defeat Seo Joo-Heon. Yoon Si-woo also told his subordinates to help Ju-heon to defeat Seo Joo-Heon, and with that they all agreed to help Ju-heon. Ju-heon was surprised when he saw those people helping him to defeat Seo Joo-Heon because they knew that Seo Joo-Heon was the one to blame here. Seo Joo-Heon underestimated all of them who thought that they could defeat Seo Joo-Heon, but they all seemed to have the courage to challenge Seo Joo-Heon. Seo Joo-Heon just smiled at all of them who were provoked by him. But on the other hand, it was seen that Seo Joo-Heon with his friends had managed to enter the tomb. Around them were several large statues. Seo Joo-Heon laughed because he knew that the people up there had been lured by his fake self that he made using the relic Pygmalion. And as long as they were lured up there, Seo Joo-Heon intended to take the relic here quickly and meet the boy named Louis. Seo Joo-Heon guided them through several hallways filled with warrior statues. After they arrived right above the room of the owner of this tomb, Seo Joo-Heon put his hand on the ground and exploded the tomb until he managed to make a large hole that led directly to the room of the owner of this tomb. And with the help of the rope relic, Seo Joo-Heon entered the hole without hesitation and saw a very large room filled with many statues. But when they looked around the room, they saw a statue that said pawn. Seo Joo-Heon began to analyze the room, which had several statues with various plots on the floor. Seo Joo-Heon realized that they were now on a giant Jenga board. Seo Joo-Heon began to look and find out what Relic wanted to invite them to play here. And with that, Seo Joo-Heon was asked to play this game, and the Relic told Seo Joo-Heon to stand on the spot reserved for the general as one of the experiments that the Relic would do to test the intelligence of Seo Joo-Heon. And hearing the challenge, Seo Joo-Heon smiled and agreed to the challenge to play because he was sure that he would win the game. Will Seo Joo-Heon win this game?